everyone. We're just going to recap on what you've learned about the thyroid and parathyroid glands. Going to be using this mind map to help us distill that information. So first of all, we'll look at the thyroid gland. We'll start off with the anatomy and location. So this is a butterfly-shaped organ which is found in the upper portion of the trachea, located just below the larynx. It's an organ that is sectioned off into two lobes, so you have the right and the left, and it also has a posterior surface with other endocrine glands on it, which we'll get to. So the thyroid gland secretes two hormones, thyroxine and calcitonin. The first one we're going to be looking at is thyroxine and how that is secreted from the thyroid gland and how it's regulated. So thinking back to what we know about the hypothalamus and the pituitary, we know that the hypothalamus secretes releasing factors. In this instance, it's going to be thyroid stimulating hormone releasing factor, or TSHRF for short. This releasing factor travels down the infundibulum, that's the stalk that connects to the anterior pituitary gland. The APG will receive this releasing factor signal, and the APG will then itself be stimulated to release thyroid stimulating hormone. This hormone, as the name suggests, targets the thyroid gland, and the thyroid gland will then increase production of the hormone thyroxine. The overall aim of that is for thyroxine, again, as it's a hormone, will travel in the bloodstream and it will target various body cells, and the effect of that is to increase the metabolic rate, and as heat is a byproduct of that, therefore it will also increase heat production. So when we look at thermoregulation later on in the course, this becomes a key factor in how humans regulate their body temperature. So make sure you remember this and understand. So looking at the other hormone produced by the thyroid gland, we're going to be looking at calcitonin. So calcitonin will directly respond to an increase in blood calcium levels and also an increase in blood phosphate levels. So just remembering back to year 11, the main constituent mineral that makes up our bones and our skeleton is calcium phosphate. So we do have a link to bones here. So let's look at calcium first of all. If the levels of calcium in the blood get too high, the thyroid gland stimulates an increase in production of the hormone calcitonin. Calcitonin will then travel in the bloodstream and it will target the kidneys and the bones, and what it will do, it will prevent or inhibit calcium reabsorption from the kidneys. So basically what that means is the kidneys will excrete more calcium in urine and it will put less calcium back into the bloodstream through that process of reabsorption. The other thing that calcitonin will do is it will decrease the breakdown of bone, which means that less calcium is being less calcium is being liberated, if you like, from the bone. And the overall effect of these two things is that our blood calcium levels are reduced. So you can see that our stimulus at the top was an increase in blood calcium levels, and the correction, the overall negative feedback effect, is a decrease. If we look at how calcitonin affects phosphate, again, it's responding to an increase in phosphate concentration in the blood. And in order to bring that back down, phosphate is removed from the blood and deposited into bone. So that's reducing the level in the bloodstream. And it will also inhibit reabsorption by the kidneys. So what we're saying here is more phosphate is also excreted. Okay, again, our stimulus was an increase in blood phosphate concentration. Calcitonin acts to bring those levels back down. All right, so now we're going to look at the posterior side of the thyroid gland, and we find 4 small P-shaped glands called the parathyroid glands. You can find an image of this in your textbook and also in your class notes. Now, parathyroid gland secretes parathyroid hormone. This hormone has other names, but we can refer to it as PTH once we've said the full name. Now, this hormone, parathyroid hormone, is antagonistic to calcitonin. So what that means is it responds in the opposite manner. So these 2 hormones will work in opposite fashions to ensure that we have a steady overall level of calcium and phosphate in the blood. PTH responds to a decrease in calcium and phosphate. So I'm just going to show you a little flow diagram of how that works. So the stimulus here is a decrease in calcium in the blood. Parathyroid hormone will work in 3 ways. Firstly, it will target the bones, and it will stimulate liberation or release of calcium from the bones into blood. So remembering our bones are a mineral storage reservoir. The other thing that PTH does is it will stimulate calcium absorption from the food that we eat that is digested in the gut, so in the small intestine mostly. And finally, the kidneys will be encouraged to reabsorb more calcium into the blood, which means less is excreted in urine. So this is just the opposite of calcitonin. The effect of all 3 mechanisms is that we increase calcium in the bloodstream. Now, I should add as a little note that vitamin D helps calcium to be absorbed by the bloodstream. And also that parathyroid hormone will also stimulate bones to release phosphate and therefore increase the levels in the blood. But this is mainly what we focus on. So just zooming out so you can see that whole thing. This is the mechanism of parathyroid hormone, and this is the mechanism of calcitonin. And these 2 work in opposition or antagonistically to each other.